Hello, friends, and welcome to Talking with Famous People. My name is host Eric. I'm the host of Talking with Famous People, and the guy who's live streaming right now. I've got a busy day today, but it's early in the morning right now, so it's not time to start getting busy on the day yet. Hi, Dark Sunshine. Hi, Moxie. Got another good night's sleep last night. In part because it's cold enough in the house, you know. I like to sleep with it at 70 or 71 degrees on the thermostat. But that was always too cold for my dad, so you know, we've been sleeping in a non-optimal environment for a long time now. And you know, you can see Rachel stretching her legs a bit as we move into the main part of the house. At some point today, I'll perhaps go through my dad's fridge inside, and I mean that's the thing. It's a slow process, right? I guess we all default to continuing our norms. I'm not planning on smoking inside the house, so I'll still be out here a lot. This is where my green screen is set up, where the computer is, and I don't think that's going to change. But what has changed already is that we no longer have the door to the master bedroom shut. So, yeah, the guest house will be like my man cave now, more or less, or our smoking / hangout cave. But getting this whole process managed, Delilah yesterday was here most of the day on the phone with various parties, handling shit. I wasn't a whole lot of help, but the bottom line is we're waiting for the family lawyer to get back to us. He's step one in this process, and Delilah wasn't able to get in touch with him yesterday. So hopefully he calls her back fairly early today. Then we can move forward on a lot of stuff. I need to call a mortuary today. We did determine that my dad wants to be cremated, which is convenient because that puts into play what seems to be the best plan, which is to cremate my dad and then have one ceremony after my mom passes, cremate her as well, take both their ashes back to Missouri and bury them. Seems a lot more of a sensible approach. Delilah had the difficult job of contacting several of my dad's friends yesterday and informing them that he had passed. And after she had done that, she made 3 of those calls. She indicated she did not want to make any more of those phone calls. That was incredibly difficult for her. But yeah, it would have played out like this eventually. I think that my dad probably had plans in his own head to do this after my mom died. But, COVID killed him, basically. More or less, COVID killed my dad. It totally knocked him off of his game. And when he got over it, when he was no longer feverish and officially sick, he was still dramatically impacted by it. So, in my whole life, I had never seen my dad that sick. I was thinking about this, and maybe it's a heavy question, but considering what happened yesterday, what do you think the difference is between just existing and proactively moving forward? Well, it was 2 days ago, actually, but the day it happened, after we finally got let back in the house by the cops and everything, I called my daughter. That was the first chance we had to call anybody because we didn't have our phones on us when we were hustled off out front. And at that moment, all I wanted to do was exist together with Delilah and Rachel. And that's what we did. We were all here together. Delilah ended up watching some stuff inside, and we ended up watching some stuff out here, but I kept going back in to see her and make sure she was there, But the rest of the world doesn't notice, So the short was kind of for my shorts manager. I don't know how much attention she's paying to any of the people, but I do know that I got invited to this other YouTube party thing tomorrow night, and if she is paying attention, I want her to recognize the fact that I had a good reason to have shut down production for a moment or two. When I push hard on Mindy's Club, I get a lot of views and I get a lot of a fairly quick sub increase rate. I think it's plausible, at least, that there are some people at YouTube who are aware of me. Who knows, maybe even rooting for me, So, on my list of things to do today is make and upload more Mindy's Club shorts. I'm not feeling especially funny right now. I'd like to feel that way. Yeah, I'm aware of that reality. Here's the thing uh, about that. Hero Lamb says, I think you're aware of this, but keep in mind this sort of sadness can creep up on you in the future, and even if you're shocked now. Well, I think maybe this is an SI thing, I'm not sure, but what I don't want to happen is to walk in the house one day, sort of lacking mindfulness, and say, "Hey, Dad," expecting him to be there. I don't want that to happen. That causes me ontological distress. The very thought of it does. Is that like the story with my dog? Maybe. My dog was a much more tragic death. My dog had some years left on her. She got hit by a car. There was nothing expected about it at all. I was totally blindsided. This is not the same thing. And as a consequence, it's not nearly as bad. What stresses me out is, obviously, going forward, there's so much to do. So much to do. Like, so many tasks to complete. Open the mail, pay these bills. Your dad didn't subject you guys to the trauma of really experiencing it. I mean, he was very thoughtful in all ways, really. He went to a place where he was going to be found right away, but wasn't going to be a huge mess to clean up inside or anything. Cameron cleaned up the mess for me yesterday, which was nice of him. He did a better job than I was hoping, and was very considerate of him. The thing is, we need to talk to the lawyer because, I actually have my dad's banking information saved on my laptop here to log in and stuff. Oh, he knew we were in the house. But I don't. It's like, I'm glad I was there to see his last moments of life. I don't. I'm not. I don't wish it had gone otherwise. So, like I said, I have my dad's banking stuff saved on my laptop. His I mean, I've more or less been taking a break these last couple of weeks to to deal with emerging situations with my dad. Uh, I have this adrenaline-y feeling sometimes that Yeah, it's sad to see things decay and struggle. It's sadder than death in a lot of ways. Is absolutely true. I feel happy to be streaming again. Streaming yesterday was very therapeutic for me, and ultimately, we all need each other. We need people. And to a certain extent, it's like what Kurt Vonnegut said in that documentary I watched about him. We need an extended family. We don't just need our immediate people, although we need them for sure. We need an extended family too. And, all of you are part of my extended family. This process of talking about things on the internet is ultimately my way of dealing with everything. So, I'm happy to be here live streaming. I feel like, okay, well, Eric, your business is defined now. We're in the business of figuring out the estate, which is, yeah, a lot of people were here yesterday. It was a well-attended stream. Which is contingent on us talking to the lawyer first, because while I could access my dad's bank accounts right now, I'm afraid of getting in some kind of trouble since he's dead now for doing anything without doing the formal shit first with the power of attorney and the lawyers and stuff like that. So we're kind of in a holding pattern waiting for the lawyer. Well, that's the beautiful thing about an ISTJ friend, Moxie. They don't forget. They don't forget about you, and my dad's the estate's not the estate's not massive, but it's not insubstantial. We're going to have a lot of estate taxes, of course, to pay, so we'll probably end up selling this house, which is worth about probably $1.2 million. Yeah, exactly. That's why I'm just kind of in limbo at the moment. Delilah PayPal'd me $500 yesterday because my dad just sent her a few $1,000s from her college fund, and so he's an ISTJ. He's not an ISFJ. And yeah, I guess Cameron is my best friend, really, in terms of functional stuff. I see him more often than I see anybody else in real life. He's a good guy. He's a good person. And a good friend. No, he's ISTJ. He's always been ISTJ. In fact, I gave him an award one time a few years back for officially recognizing him as the best ISTJ. Well, he's the only one that I've taken advantage of his offer to help with something. I said, actually, I do have something I would like you to help me with if you're willing to. And that's cleaning up the blood over there on the side of the house. I don't know why it bothered me. I didn't expect it to bother me. I expected to come back to the backyard and squirt it down right away. But it turned out I didn't want to go over there for some reason. I didn't want to go look at it. So I asked him to clean that for me, and he did it. He did way above and beyond the Call of Duty. I just went squirted with a hose, but he didn't want to leave a diluted, bloody pool of mess over there, I guess. So he went out there with cleaner and paper towels and shit. And he startled the fuck out of me in the kitchen. I thought he'd already gone home, and I walked into the kitchen, and there was this man in the kitchen, and it shocked me, because every time there's a man in the kitchen, it's my dad or me. Well, I don't think we're gonna rush into selling the house, but it's also the case that Los Angeles has a very high cost of living, and that we don't need a house this big. But Delilah and I talked a little bit yesterday about. Thank you, Dulles, by the way, if I didn't mention it. Yeah, well, I haven't used any yet. I haven't done anything like that. I'm waiting for the lawyer. So, the thing is, it's not like I'm in a big hurry to spend any money or anything. Beyond my regular expenses. But the thing is, it would be ontologically traumatic for me to sell this house, except for the fact that I got to spend the last 3 years here. I got to spend some of that time with both my mom and my dad here, and then the majority of it with just my dad here. And so, I got to do this kind of SI linkage that's important, but that people don't necessarily get to do. It's why I've said on a few occasions, it doesn't go any better than this. This is the best it goes. This is the best you can possibly hope for. Is your parents live a long life, you get to be there at the end for them to the best of your ability. Mine may have been inadequate in a lot of ways, but I don't know if I did the best I could, but I did the best I could given who I am. Yeah, it's as it should be. But it's also the case that no matter what else we might want to say, Rachel and I and Delilah have been waiting for my parents to pass, because until my dad passed, he was ultimately the patriarch of this family and defining how things went for all parties within the family. And while this life the last few years has afforded me plenty of time to do what I've wanted, it's also the case that it's kept me in a place of limbo that has been a challenge. Partially because of COVID, right? Prior to COVID hitting, Rachel and I were living a somewhat different life. My dad as well. We all were. We had just come back from Hawaii. Rachel, my dad, me, Delilah's boyfriend at the time. And the COVID shutdown impacted us all emotionally and mentally. I think everybody in the world it did. But now that shutdown time is over, Rachel and Delilah and I, we all need to think about what we want to do for the rest of our lives. My mom's still alive, but I don't think she's going to be alive for much longer. And right now, she's the one who's the next of kin. So it's whoever has power of attorney over her that is technically in charge of things right now. I believe I have power of attorney over her, and Delilah has power of attorney over my dad. My dad's dead, so that makes me the person in charge at the moment. My dad split a lot of stuff between me and Delilah. And when Delilah talked to Ron, who's our investment guy and who manages our portfolio and stuff, apparently he was devastated, heartbroken to hear the news, and also informed Delilah that she was going to be the one who had to sign most of the stuff because that's how my dad set it up with the portfolio. So, I don't know. My dad seemed to think, incorrectly, that he could manage what happened after his death by legally empowering either Delilah or me mostly, in the last year or so, more shifting the power to Delilah as he decided he didn't trust me, basically. I was too irresponsible. Of course, something he didn't really get. Well, he probably felt like he was saving us some burden, but I think it was more simple than that. I think he lost physical abilities to do what made him happy, and he felt as though he was losing his mental acuity as well, probably because COVID makes you kind of foggy-headed and stuff. And I just think that he decided it's all downhill from here, and I want to skip the part where I can't see and I can't hear and I can barely walk. May have been somewhat for us, but his time was over, He viewed it that way. Like, I'm not going to sue Rimmeron or anything like that, because while I do believe it probably played a role in the timing, it's not ultimately a bad thing. It's ultimately my dad controlling his own destiny, as he always wanted to. He always insisted he was going to. He had informed me on a few occasions in the past that without explicitly directly saying it, that he was going out like this, you know? That he wasn't going to be in a hospital, that he was going to control his own destiny. So, since in the United States, in California anyway, we don't have any kind of death with dignity law or anything, not that he would have taken advantage of it anyway. Why bother, right? Why bother going through all this nonsense when that's why he has a handgun, presumably. That's why he had a handgun. I don't know why else he would have even had a handgun. It looked like he got it a long time ago, though. Maybe 20 years ago. I mean, I don't know. What we found in his room was the empty box with a pamphlet for the handgun, the brand name and stuff. They had taken the gun with them. The cops did. That sounds depressing, Winston's mom. What wasn't depressing has been watching Only Murders in the Building with Steve Martin and Martin Short and Selena Gomez. Well, I mean, here I am. I'm annoyed, in retrospect, at that doctor, that last doctor. And it makes me wonder if I learned to stop yelling at the doctors at exactly the wrong time or something, you know. Because I didn't yell at her. I just shook my head and explained what was going on to my dad, who couldn't, you know. The other thing is, masks. Masks had a role in killing my dad. Because he couldn't understand people without reading their lips as well as listening to them. And it's been this continual drag on his capacity to handle shit for the last couple of years. You know, when people made those mask rules and shit, I don't remember anybody talking about how it was going to impact people who were hard of hearing. But it impacted them a lot. It impacted people with hearing problems a lot. Not only could they not read lips, but what they were hearing was muffled by the mask. If there hadn't been all those insane quarantines and lockdowns, maybe my dad would have gotten it a couple of years ago. And when he was a little healthier, and maybe he would have gotten over it, and maybe he would be okay still right now, you know. But those are the kind of unintended consequences that happen when people make public policy that isn't justified. Just like the doctor prescribed medications on a warrant that didn't justify her decision. The warrant was benzos make old people who have a tendency to be subject to slip and fall injuries more subject to slip and fall injuries. But like I said shortly after that doctor's appointment, doctors need to ask people, what matters most to you? What do you think? Here's some risks of this course of action. Here's some risks of this course of action. Here's some risks of this course of action. Here's some risks of no action at all. What matters most to you? What are you most worried about? Had the doctor cared at all about that question, she would have realized that my dad's not somebody who's subject to a lot of slip and falls. Wasn't somebody. Even though he had recently fallen and broken 2 ribs, he had fallen because he had basically passed out. You know, it's like he got up with a high fever to go pee when he was in the heat of COVID and passed out and fell down onto this chair in the bathroom and broke his ribs. And as far as psychiatry goes, the problem was that doctor was not a psychiatrist. She was a general practitioner, and she was she was made immediately defensive by my suggesting anything or pointing out that calling Klonopin a fast-acting benzo is factually false. So, even though I was less confrontational than I'd been in previous engagements with doctors on behalf of my dad, I nevertheless managed to make her defensive just by having an opinion, I guess, and obviously being smart or something like that. My dad had scheduled for tomorrow a follow-up phone visit. Um, to see how the Remeron was working. Well, he's not with a different doctor. So, Dr. Clifton prescribed these Remerons, and we're supposed to have a follow-up appointment with her this week. As soon as we went to go make the appointment, the nurse said, "Oh, she doesn't have any open slots. We'll get you Dr. Whatever." Who knows what that doctor would have done. But, you're talking about an end-of-life situation. And whether it happened a few days before his 85th birthday, which is when it did happen, or if it happened a month after his 85th birthday, it doesn't really make that big of a difference. And the reality is, had the doctor listened to me and prescribed Klonopin, like I suggested, it may have happened that my dad still did what he did on Monday morning. In which case, I wouldn't want somebody blaming me for suggesting, for winning that battle over the doctor and having Klonopin prescribed. Well, he was born in 1937, Hero Lamb. He was 4 years old when World War II started, and, about 10 years old when it ended. He was of the silent generation. And it was definitely the case that my dad was not an emotionally expressive person. The emotion he expressed, when he expressed an emotion, was anger. That was the only emotion that he really expressed. He may have felt a lot of emotions. My ex-wife's mother called last night, and her message was, "Your father loved you and Delilah so much." And I agree with her, but telling us that wasn't his style, No, that's what I was thinking too, Winston's mom. Because Monday night, I had half a Klonopin, and I slept like I haven't slept in a long time. And when I woke up yesterday morning, I felt reinvigorated, something like that. It does make me wonder if maybe my dad might have needed a really good night's sleep too, but my dad didn't like me helping so much. I felt some kind of relief when Oh yeah, he paid for her school too. When she was, it was something the doctor mentioned, but I think my dad had been prescribed it before and didn't have a good experience with it. I don't want a 1 month supply of Klonopin. Mostly, I don't take benzos. You know, my dad didn't like to ask for help, need help with things. He felt like a burden. No matter what I said, it didn't matter. You know, I felt this sort of sense of relief as my dad needed my help more. I was able to help more because when he didn't need my help, he still wanted me to help some, but he didn't. He didn't allow me to help in any ways that I could really help. It's very difficult for me to just do exactly what I'm told without having control over how things are done. I don't like being micromanaged, and I don't like, either give me control of the thing and leave it up to me, or don't give me control of the thing and you deal with it. But don't tell me to deal with things without giving me control over them. I mean, the thing is, my dad was always a big feminist. Interestingly, a real feminist, which is to say, it wasn't a political thing. He just fundamentally treated women as though they were equals. You know, he loved women's sports. He's been watching. Well, he was a big Pac-12 fan. I mean, that was another thing that upset him, was USC going to the Big Ten. You know, a large part of his life, his fun and such, when it was linked to the USC football team. He and my mom used to travel to the away games as well as having season tickets for the home games, and that was always very. I mean, it's what my dad liked to do. He liked to plan getaways, go do those things, see a game, etc. Yeah, well, he had his PhD in philosophy of all things. He had a doctorate of philosophy in philosophy. He also had like a master's in education or something. But he wasn't somebody who insisted people call him Dr. Strauss or anything. Most people called him Mr. Strauss. I'd sometimes correct him. This wasn't a Christmas present, actually. This was a present he got me when Rachel and I went to Laughlin, and he had to take care of our two cats. One of whom was Trouble, who's really a demon cat. Trouble is an absolute demon cat. He's a weird, strange, manly cat. He's a dog, more or less. He's so much of a dog, it's ridiculous. But yeah, I put this shirt on in honor of him. Delilah yesterday was wearing a shirt my dad gave us for Christmas, the anime shirts. Well, Trouble's not an ISTP. I do believe that animals have personality types. I believe that Capio is an ISTJ, and I believe that Trouble is an ENFJ. The most talkative cat I've ever encountered He seems to have a lot of things to say, and he's got a lot of different meows in which to say them. When I was tripping, I don't know, a week ago or something, I'm absolutely convinced that Trouble confessed to being the guilty party for hurting. No, it's not true that all cats are SI heavy. Trouble's not at all. He barely ever cleans himself. He doesn't even notice that he's got fleas on him or scratch or anything. And is shockingly not SI. In contrast to Capillo, who's constantly cleaning herself. Trouble's very FE. He's determined to walk out to the front with us every time and show everybody that we're his people. He sends away any other cats that come around. He chases Capillo off of this backyard area. He seems to have accepted that she has domain on inside the house. You know, she likes to sleep with me and Rachel. Sometimes you do want to be numbed by drugs, but I've not found it to be the case that traumatic things link to me wanting to do a lot of drugs. It's always been the case that when things were bad, I retreated away from ways of intoxicating myself. I always have linked partying with being happy and good times. You know, this is one message I've stated on many occasions before that I really believe in. Drugs are for partying. If you're using them for something else, you're using them wrong. But there are times when you just need to knock yourself out, you know? I always thought if you need drugs, the people at the party must be lame and boring. What are you talking about, people at the party? Drugs are for partying doesn't mean you have to have a party, okay? Look, like, today or tomorrow, I'll probably get mushrooms if my mushroom contact is back from vacation. And part of the reason why I'll probably get them is I want to laugh, you know? I want to laugh, I want to make jokes. I made a joke. The first joke I made was not long after the cops let us back in the house. And I said, 5 minutes after my dad kills himself and there's already flies in the house. I blame the cops, you know. They were going in, going out, leaving the doors open, not closing the screen door. There were never flies in the house. When my dad was alive, there were never any flies in the house. It's like, back here, you open the door even a crack, and whole flocks of flies come in. They just are desperate to get in here. I don't know why. I think they're trying to get back at me for killing so many of them. When I used to live at Laverne, I'd spend hours killing flies. I'd go out front with 2 fly swatters, my torch, And my plan was I'm going to kill all the flies until there just are no more flies. I never did get there. It's impossible to kill all the flies. Ayo, 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 party at my parents' house. If you haven't seen Party at My Parents' House, it's a Saturday Night Live skit with Jimmy Fallon in it. It's spectacular. It's probably Jimmy Fallon's best work ever. I'm sure Jimmy Fallon came up with that skit. One of my best days recently. I mean, generally speaking, I think Fallon's pretty terrible too. Fallon is almost certainly a ENFP, which means he mistakenly thinks that his enjoyment with things is part of what needs to be shared with the audience. That's not how you do comedy properly. But when he has a really great idea and he's enamored of it, as he was in Party at My Parents' House, and it is a really great idea, and it's a brilliant skit, well, that's when he does his best work. You can still see him glowing, and you can still sort of sense the presumption that his glowing is relevant to this whole proceeding. It definitely isn't. There's nothing pleasing about him not being able to hold character because he's such a little sprightly elf or whatever. That's just super gay and horrible. But, you know, he's not without his merits. He's not totally untalented or something like that. I can't stand Conan. I just cannot stand him. His lack of charisma is troubling. He had no business ever being made into a TV host, in my opinion. Everything about him says, I am not ready to be in the spotlight. I am not meant to be in the spotlight. I can't handle being in front of the camera or being the person who's managing this shit. You know, it's like if you want to talk about a host who does a great job of actually interviewing people and stuff, well, Jon Stewart did an excellent job of that, although you may or may not like his politics, so that's fine. And also, Stephen Colbert is a pretty great interviewer, host type person. David Letterman did a great job of it. Johnny Carson obviously was excellent. In contrast, you got people who were dramatically worse, like Jimmy Fallon and Jay Leno. And then people who were probably underappreciated, like Arsenio Hall. Arsenio Hall was actually quite good at interviewing people, but his show had so many big flaws, and it had so many dorky elements to it that I couldn't watch it, but he was a good interviewer. Being a good interviewer and being a good host of a talk show, it has multiple components, right? But really the job of a host of a talk show is to interview people. And that's an art form. And if you don't understand the art form adequately, you won't do a good job of it. I think FI people might like Conan a little bit better than FE people do. I find him not endearingly awkward, just awkward. What's the opposite of endearingly? Off-puttingly awkward. occasionally I'll watch a couple clips from his show if there's somebody that he interviewed that I want to see. But I haven't found that he contributes in a positive way to the part that I want to see. But I get it. People have different tastes, and it is true that Conan's a good writer. So he's probably got pretty good instincts about what works in skits and stuff like that. He started off as a writer on The Simpsons, you know. He does seem to have good instincts about comedy writing. But some people kind of need to stay in their lane. I'm what you'd call radio beautiful. People are not going to consume my media because I'm so pretty to look at. I have to be engaging in some other ways. And one of the reasons why I'm enamored of Mindy's Club and think it has a much higher ceiling than what I'm doing here on Talking with Famous People is because it doesn't involve any pictures of me. So it doesn't matter that I'm how toothless I am. It doesn't matter whether I've gotten a haircut or not. It just matters whether it works as a little short, you know? Yeah, well, it's gonna go pretty soon. It wasn't very long before my dad passed that I started thinking of this as a playoff period in hockey. Well, I guess we just won the Stanley Cup or lost it. One of the two. The other possibility is that I don't cut my hair and beard until after my mom dies as well. That's possible. There's a lot of weird omen-y shit that's been happening too. Peter has lost all of his feathers. And Peter is a peacock that my mom probably started feeding 10 years ago. And has been around the house for probably 10 years. I remember him from a ways back. And we've always been able to identify him because he has this one wonky feather on the side of his body that it's a little black and white feather. They have these little black and white feathers in one part on the side of them. And it's bent. It's bent out like this. He's the only peacock who's got this, and it makes it easy for us to distinguish him. But, you know, he got injured, and all of his feathers started falling out, you know, a couple weeks ago. Well, more or less. He's a wild peacock, but as my mom started going into dementia, you know, she was always a putterer who liked to do things. She always liked to... we're always taking in stray cats and stuff when I was a kid. Pussykins, my childhood cat, had like 5 litters of kittens. And my mom was allergic to cats, but it made her try to... yeah, I look like my mom more than my dad. I mean, my mom and I are the same quadra. My dad and I are different quadras, so that kind of makes sense. His name's Peter Peacock. We'd call him Peter, we'd call him Pete. Either one. And he's still alive, but he got injured, like I said, a couple of weeks ago. And he's still limping badly. And he lost all of his big feathers, like, way faster than they ever were supposed to. Like, they're just littering our yard. No, he wasn't really on any social media. And Delilah called his friends yesterday. She made 3 phone calls that she said, were very difficult to make. She's been unbelievable. Winston's mom, as I told Rachel, our job is not to police the animals. And we have a limited responsibility for them. So like, yes, it's the case that I feel we owe it to Peter to continue to feed him indefinitely. But it's also the case that we don't need to spend our energy getting mad at some young male peacock who seems to be trying to encroach on Peter's territory, or try to police that. So, as he's been injured, more frequently I've been taking food to him out front where he sits during the day usually, so he doesn't have to walk so much since he's injured. It's also the case that I don't always remember, and that sometimes he comes back to the backyard here. Well, now that he's not really able to, now that he's obviously injured, other peacocks, like this mother and babies, come around the same time, and they'll get much of the food that I throw out for him. And it's like, okay, I don't want those other peacocks here at all, but I also don't want to be the guy who's responsible for policing the peacocks, you know? Well, it's not like we hold them or touch them or kiss them or anything. They're wild birds. It's just that my mom started feeding Pete as she got into dementia. And so she's probably been feeding, we started feeding him about 10 years ago, probably. And the more demented she got, the more frequently she'd feed that peacock. So, I mean, he really got habituated to eating his meals here. But when he was a young, fit peacock, uninjured, he could defend his territory from the other peacocks coming around. Now, he can't. And the other peacocks are learning that we give him food, and if they kind of hover around, they can steal his food. So Rachel really starts to take ownership of those kind of situations. She treats all the animals just like they're people. It's kind of ridiculous, really. Like, she got really mad at Trouble for chasing away Capillo, but I explained to her that Capillo's not unaccustomed to this. When she came to live in Laverne with me, there was this cat there, Midnight, who was the dominant female cat of an existing population of cats, and they did not let Capillo integrate into that population at all, and Midnight was always chasing her away. But the thing is, Capillo learned that I was in the garage, that. And then she'd come sit on the back of my chair in the garage. I had a big chair like this, and she'd sit. It wasn't quite this tall, but she'd sit back here behind my head, and then sometimes she'd sit on my lap or whatever, and I'd feed her. I mean, she'd manage to eat, but she was always, whenever she saw Midnight, she'd run away in terror, because Midnight would always try to chase after her. And yes, I would try to be like, Midnight, stop it, but there's only so much you can do to police the animals. Birds are assholes. Most of them bully each other for food. I had a bird feeder and watched birds fight in my backyard sometimes. Blue jays, ravens, and predator birds are all assholes. They swoop down and attack other birds and take their stuff. Ravens are the worst. They attack in groups. They'll even attack hawks and eagles. Yeah, I mean, we had chickens before, and I didn't like the way that they interacted with each other. By and large, we had these two, we tried to integrate these 2 chickens and this group of 3 chickens, and I didn't like the way that went down. But chickens are kind of sweet too. With people, we had this chicken that sat on our lap and stuff. The point is, whatever's going on, I'm not responsible for policing the animals. And neither is Rachel. I don't like it when trouble kills things. I don't care if it's a lizard or even a possum, because he's killed full-grown possums before. I think he's the one who injured Peter. And he confessed it to me when I was on mushrooms. When I was on mushrooms and mescaline, I think. It was that day, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. Shit sucks no matter what species you are sometimes, So, I'm not quite sure what to do about the Peter situation, because I want to shoo away the other peacocks without bothering him, but he's also not, he's a lot more tame than the other peacocks, maybe with us, but he still doesn't let us touch him or anything, and I have not even taken it out of the box yet, Winston's mom. I plan to at some point, but I see it right there. I haven't taken it out of the box yet. I could do a little faux documentary on the cats. Probably not the project I should prioritize, though. I mean, this is the thing. I want to take mushrooms, ideally this week, because I want to be reminded of how hilarious it is, how everything's hilarious in the world. Because the world is truly hilarious. And yet, it's also a lot of other things. So, mushrooms helps me to pay attention to the hilarious part, the hilarious angle, from angles of hilarity. you don't get to exactly decide when you're feeling funny, by and large. But I can reliably anticipate that mushrooms will help me to feel funny. And just generally to slide into angles of hilarity on existence and the goings about of being me. Right now, I don't feel very hilarious. Psilocybin. I've got stuff to do today. Difficult things to do. I need to go to the nursing home and inform them and my mother. Not that my mother's going to understand it, I don't think, but she deserves to be told. My dad occasionally made a joke. He was not very funny. He told not very good jokes that he heard someplace else sometimes, but maybe he'd make an occasional pun. But they generally weren't very good jokes. He got a little bit better about he'd made fewer jokes and got a little bit better in the ones he made as he got older, I guess. But he was not a funny person, no. Neither was my mother. Neither of them were jokers. My mother was an ISFJ through and through. I don't know what other way to say it, She loved listening to Dodger games while she puttered in the garden. She cooked meals for the family. She always got enough sleep. She was concerned about taking care of herself. She was also a hard worker, She graded lots of papers and she, my father's birthday would have been today. It would have been his 85th birthday. We're going to get a card from his sister in the mail saying, well, you made it to 85. Prematurely writing a card. Could you guesstimate your mother and father's Enneagram? My dad was an 8. I mean, there's no doubt about that. He was an 8. (863). He's an 863. Yeah, that's a premature sell. That's celebrating before you get into the end zone. You know you're gonna fumble that shit. Handy Smurf is an ISTP. I don't know. I don't remember the Smurfs characters very well. I did watch the Smurfs, but it was a long time ago. Yeah. My dad used to be a lot more angry. When I was little, he was angry. Not necessarily at his family, but he used to drive so angry. These clowns are coming out of the woodwork. He'd say. The thing is, a lot of shit's going down in the world right now, it feels like. I know that that's not a very meaningful claim or a meaningful justification for a claim, but we're in a time of transition of some sort, you know. There's, I think prices have basically stabilized at this point, probably, but we had this huge jump in prices. People call it inflation, but really, it was a, a big but fairly short-lived, I suspect, inflationary shift, you know, that happened rather all of a sudden. I mean, that might have to do with the drug he was on, Rain. So it's like, if you wanna blame Remeron for something, which, I mean, it may be that Remeron was ultimately the thing that triggered this. It does say right on the warning label, you know, that it causes suicidal thoughts, etc. But it has big suicide warnings on it. In that regard, it would make more sense to, if you were going to try to hold someone accountable, it would make more sense to hold the doctor accountable, because she's a general practitioner who's not asking any questions that matter. She wants to know how bad the anxiety is, how often you feel it, and the answers were like 10 all the time, 24 hours a day. He was very consumed with anxiety when we went to the doctor that time. The thing is, these kind of things, F's for him and S's are supposed to be instrumental. What happened at the end was reality was forcing him to treat the S's and F's as absolute values. I was there taking care of him, but he doesn't want to experience my love as an end at all. It's just an instrumental value for him. And S is just supposed to take care of itself so that he can do what he wants to do with it, because the N's and the T's are his absolute values. He wants to solve real world problems that link somehow to stuff that is intuitively resonant. But reality had forced him to treat S's and F's as absolute values, and he couldn't do it. He didn't want to do it. He hated it. So probably he would have waited till after his birthday had that Remeron done some good, or, you know, had his depression and anxiety symptoms that he went to the doctor for been successfully addressed by some kind of medication, he probably would have waited till his birthday. But, you know, Rain, this is the sort of thing that we really shouldn't TI too much, I don't think. I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's the wrong function. Look, things aren't necessarily motivated like that, right? He was in a very dark place at the end of his life. His wife was going to die soon, and a bunch of other stuff. So the strange thing is, it's so much different, obviously, if, as an experience as a media maker, to have my father have shot himself rather than to have said died in a slip and fall accident. What I processed at the beginning was realities regarding the cops, you know? It's like, oh, I went all of a sudden from chest compressions to being detained. You know, that's quite an experience. They were nice, you know. At first, they were standoffish, very standoffish. But as we progressed through the investigation, they got nicer, and you know, the cops went and got my cigarettes for me, which was nice. Cops asked if we wanted a water or something, and they brought us waters from the fridge, and um, I said, well, what I really wanted was a cigarette. So, cop went to the back house, got me my cigarettes, and that was nice of him. Eventually, they took the tape down. They had our whole house taped off with police tape. Yeah, I asked her to tell her dad and her sister. I don't believe that her mother or brother will be in our life again, because she doesn't trust them, and she has good reason not to trust them, and they won't deal with me. They absolutely refuse to engage me at all, because I expect shit to be handled in a healthy fashion. And I won't tolerate anything but that happening. The thing is, Rachel and I are going to get married. And the reason is because my dad's opposition is the only reason, really, we haven't gotten married before. So, but what's most important is that Delilah has for a long time now been completely unabashed or unmitigated at all in her approval of Rachel. Delilah loves Rachel. Delilah hated Kimberly. And that matters a lot. So the family now is defined by me and Delilah foremost, but by the three of us, you know. And that ought to be formalized. It matters whether you're a blood relative, as we discovered. When, you know, anytime you're dealing with like dealing with my mom's shit, making decisions on her behalf, having the same last name, being the son, makes everything go smoothly. If you don't have that, everything is very difficult. I haven't actually talked with Rachel about this yet, but I'm hopeful she'll change her name, I guess. Because it facilitates things when you have the same name. So, well, they don't just get along. That's the thing. Delilah really loves Rachel, and Rachel, I think, really loves Delilah as well. And hi, Rachel. most of all, it's just going to take us a while to really adjust to this, to a new, to not. Heretofore, Rachel and I have always been operating under my dad's frame, to some extent. So, it's like, we're moving into the rest of the house. I'm planning on taking my dad's car on our errands today, because I don't want to just have it sit in the garage indefinitely without being driven. And my dad didn't drive it much those last few weeks, really. Rachel Strauss in the phonetic alphabet is Romeo Sierra. Rachel Strauss. Works well. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with the sound of that. Rachel Strauss. It does have a lot of R in it. Might be difficult for a toddler to say. But we don't really need to be easily spoken by toddlers as a precondition for that to occur. I don't think. It's not like we run a preschool. We ran a preschool. Well, then we need to change our name to Poppy Turtle. Something like that. It's easy to say. Poppy Turtle. That's easy to say. Rachel Lapalosa. I mean, I like the way the Rachel's name sounds right now. Rachel Lapalosa. It's got a really nice trochaic sound to it. Rachel Lapalosa. Rachel Strauss. It shifts the accent to the last name, I guess. But regardless, she's a Strauss, Rachel and I we have a quiet love. We don't express perhaps as the most romantic of couples. We aren't super touchy-feely. I'm not especially romantic, I guess you might say, but we fit together like bread and butter. It's been, these kind of experiences really drive home how important your loved ones are. Yeah, Rachel and I have had as a relationship trial by magma. This is not very non-ideal conditions to start a relationship in. The whole way the whole thing went down. But throughout it all, we've never been at each other's throats. Not at all. It's not like we've had to work through anything. Maybe each of us has had to work through a couple of our own things. But there were never any evident structural. Okay. I'm removing that comment. No, her meds have not affected our sex life at all. It's ridiculous, Giovanni Giorgio. Ridiculous. I should just ban you outright, but whatever. Irwin Smith saying forward. Who's Irwin Smith? I don't know who that is. Is it Emmett Smith's brother? The thing is, Rachel and I have happy times, we have sad times, we have whatever times. But almost always, we are having times. It's not like, oh God, Rachel's in a bad mood again. It might be that way a little bit with me, but even if I'm in a bad mood, it's not really a bad mood usually, so much as it is kind of a ho-hummery, a lack of interest in doing things. But you know, everything's gonna change now. Everything's different because we've been waiting. We've been in limbo, we've been waiting. And it all stays the same with both Lapalosa and Strauss. Wow. That's very interesting, Lou. That's pretty cool. You know, it's also the case that if you look at our biorhythm compatibility, it's off the charts. Rachel and I have the highest biorhythm compatibility I've ever seen. That's not putting in the same 2 days and getting 100%. It's like 98% or something, 99%. And most of them were terrible. If you put in 2 random days in there, you get terrible. Compared to us. The thing is, neither Rachel nor I is FI front stack. So, to the extent that we've felt unsatisfied or burdened by this situation, it was pushed out of the way by FE considerations. Who are we to be complaining about anything, blah, blah, blah. You know, all these other kind of narratives. But the fact is, in a lot of ways, we've been trapped, you know? And we no longer are. But there's gonna be a lot of shit involved. I mean, we've got so much shit to deal with as a coming couple of months. And the thing is, a lot of our malaise that I think Rachel and I have experienced somewhat of late stems from not being able to be useful or needed to be useful. It's like it's one thing to know you can help. It's another thing to know that you need to help. My dad didn't like that second situation, but for me, it's hugely important to that the things that I have to do that I need to actually do them. They need rather for reasons that link to my own frames. Um, Now both Rachel and I will grow into our new respective roles. Um, there's a biorhythm compatibility calculator. Type that into Google, biorhythm compatibility calculator, and hopefully you'll get to the right thing. Or maybe I'll look it up for you. All right, let's see here. Biorhythm. Why do I always misspell rhythm? Why? After all these years, do I still misspell rhythm? You'd think I would have learned it by now. Yeah, here it is. Copy. And now I'm going to paste. I'm going to use the paste function, everybody. Get ready to be pasted. If you want to calculate your biorhythm compatibility between you and your significant other, perhaps, between you and a friend, whatever, there you go. You can calculate it. I'm going to put in me and Rachel's birthdays right now. I'm going to put that. I'm going to put this. Pew, pew. God damn it, I accidentally muted myself. Alright. God damn it. You didn't hear any of that. Everything I said was so important. And you didn't hear any of it. Even though it was super so important. Now what am I going to do? Now I'm going to have to try to remember what I said. Well, what I said was this. Rachel and I, right now, physically and emotionally, are at like point 0.01 or 0.02. 0 is the best you can get, and 1 is the worst you can get, like the furthest apart you can get. If you put in any two birthdays, you're not going to get our score like Rachel and mine. We get 98.13 as our mean. Both physical and emotional are like 99 point something. And intellectual is 95.5 for a mean of 98.3, something like that. So we're very biorhythm compatible. Does this matter? Does that calculator result mean anything? Well, I mean, it means we get to brag about our biorhythm compatibility. It definitely means that. If we weren't so biorhythm compatible, we wouldn't be able to brag about it. It calculated something. It is the case that most two birthdays you put into that thing, if not any two pretty much, that aren't the same day, they give you less of a good score than me and Rachel got. A worse score than we got, you know. Do I think that explains why Rachel and I are compatible? Do I think it's anything other than just we randomly got a high number on this random thing? Yeah. That's what I actually think. To be honest, yeah, that's what I actually think. But Rachel likes this stuff. So, you know. I am determined not to shit on things that Rachel likes. Because FI is my absolute value, not TI. If Rachel likes it, then it's fine. But you know, the thing is, Rachel has begun to be a little bit more dismissive of some of these things than she used to be, independently of me trying to suggest her be more dismissive. I'm not interested in shitting on any of Rachel's parades, you know. But I think it's fair to say she's somewhat disillusioned with astrology at this point. I mean, it's hard, I think, if you get into astrology, it's hard not to get disillusioned by it because you discover that you can always justify anything because there's always some moon in some position of some planet and some, that links to whatever story you want to tell. So that's fine, but the more successfully it does that, the less meaningful the link is, right? To the extent that you can justify any story because there's infinite linkages, then none of those linkages really mean anything. Or are representative of a way even to meaningfully taxonomy arbitrarily, because Libras aren't necessarily Libras because they could have their moon in which could make them like actually more like Sagittarius, which aren't really Sagittariuses because they could have their whatever house in in which case really they look like Tauruses. Yeah, that kind of shit. The more you can do that with something, the less meaningful what you're saying is. Now, meaningful doesn't mean correct. So astrology could be meaningful by eliminating all that stuff, just focusing on the 12 signs and saying, because you're a Taurus, you're like, yeah. But when it does that, the majority of people don't identify really with those qualities. So it's just factually false. Third parties would also not probably attribute to people those, yeah. So, yeah, it's the same kind of logic as jumpers. To the extent that you can have an ISFJ that looks exactly like an ENTP, and there's no meaningful way to distinguish between them that can be applied by third parties, can be tested, replicated, basic shit like that. Objective personality. What a joke. The thing is, at least with astrology, it's not purporting to be anything but astrology, right? It's not like astrology is purporting to be the scientific method. Objective personality is trying to dress itself up in a scientist suit, but it's that shit. It's that jumper kind of logic. You were happier before you knew your birth chart? Well, to the extent that you can, darling, just don't worry so much about your birth chart. I'm not too worried about where the stars were when you were born. It's like, I rarely look at the stars. When I'm looking up in the sky, I'm looking for UFOs. The stars, yes, they're these, cosmic constants that span human generations and yada. Good for them. They can take care of themselves up in the sky. I don't need to worry about them, and neither do you. They'll take care of themselves. Okay? It's kind of like the animals around here. We don't need to police them. Yes, we kind of wish that they would behave differently. But that doesn't mean it's our job to police them. Animals are not moral agents because they're not subject to moral reasoning. And you cannot explain to the peacocks why they should be nice to the injured peacock and not try to steal his food. I like to look at the moon and change my moonstone ring during the full moon. I like the moon too. The moon's a much more significant player in my life than the stars are. Because, of course, Tiffany's advocacy group called The Moon, y'all stink, is deeply opposed to the moon on the grounds that it fails to do its job except for one day a month, its job being to be a circle. So, obviously we write the moon a lot of letters telling the moon that it stinks. The moon's cool. It's like the moon pops up on the horizon. Sometimes it looks so big because it's like right down there on the bottom. It's like super big. You get like a super big full moon, And you go, wow, look how big the moon is. But despite how big it looks, you can never get a good picture of it. This is what the moon has in common with Sasquatch. You can never take a good picture of Sasquatch, just like you can never take a good picture of the moon. It doesn't matter how many times you point your phone at it and try to focus it and push it and go like, no, get the moon though. Well, it just never comes out good. It's unspeakably evil, actually, Ruben. It's also unbearably evil, sure. But most importantly, it's unspeakably evil. Now, that might seem oxymoronic. Didn't I just speak of its evil? Yeah, but it didn't do anyone any good. Nobody could even still conceptualize it. So I guess it's speakably but incommunicatively evil. Incommunicably? I'm not sure. It's unspeakably evil. Even though you aren't an Enneagram type, do you ever find yourself pondering on someone's Enneagram? No. The only thing I think about Enneagram really is that people either have 8 in their tri-type or they don't. I think about that because it's something you can see in the world pretty easily. When someone's an 8, they're going to get angry sometimes, and they're going to be expressive in their anger. They're assertive, you know. 8s are the dominant people of the world. They expect to get their way, etc. And then other people are not 8s. If they're not 8s, there's 2 possible things. They're 9s or 1. The difference is 1s don't let me yell at them and make me extra mad by excising themselves from the conversation, even though I think they need to stand there and be yelled at by me. Whereas 9s make me want to stop yelling at them because they're not. 9s don't make me angry. It's 1s are the ones who make me angry, or other 8s usually. Well, look, everybody can get angry. The question is, do you treat anger as though it were like we treat most emotions, which is we don't generally extrovert the majority of our emotions. So if I'm feeling very happy, I'm not going to say I'm happy over and over again. You might see indications of it in my general bearing and demeanor, or in the fact that I'm laughing a lot, or something like that. But the experience of the emotion is not fundamentally an extroverted one. So anger is the exception to that for some people. That they if they're angry, then they're extroverting that anger. Somebody's getting my foot up their ass, quote unquote. One's passion to improve the world goes bad when they start to believe that in order to be loved, they have to be perfect and not make mistakes. Well, I mean, isn't that really true for everybody? None of us like to make mistakes, and we're all prone, to some extent, to losing faith in our own lovability when we fuck up badly enough, you know? Hi, Tadashi's in Hua. 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 Kai. You know, I haven't seen enough of Kai lately in Kingdom. Kai needs to be needs to be included more in Kingdom. Okay. You're welcome, Tadashi Zenhua. You know, your name seems like a combination of a Japanese first name and a Chinese last name. Is it? Because remember, I'm somebody who once lived near the corner of Hongqiaolu, Shuichanglu. Yeah, I'd have the cabs drop me off right at the corner of Hongqiaolu and Shuichanglu. It was just a short jaunt, half a block jaunt down the sidewalk to my apartment. In the grand old city of Shanghai. Or origin of the Shanghai slang? Or is that the Singapore slang? Sorry, never mind. Origin of getting shanghaied? Which means I thought Chinese people hated the Japanese. You know, on Chinese TV, they've got this movie called Kill All the Japanese. Apparently, it's quite popular. It's a really straightforward title, you know. It makes it pretty clear to everybody the opinion of the movie about Japanese people. Oh, this must have been before the rape of Nanking. Huh. Well, you know, back in the day, a long time ago, way before the 20th century, Japan and China ran concurrent empires side by side, so to speak, without really coming into conflict with each other very much. There was, I suppose, a mutual Asian empire, collegial quality to the relationship, perhaps. But by the time the 20th century rolled around, the Japanese had become so virulently ethnocentric that they viewed other Asian races as dogs. Which is why I've been suggesting lately, instead of having as a stock enemy in movies, a stock bad guy, evil bad guy, you don't have to worry about convincing people they're evil. Currently, our stock movie trope is the NAZIs, you know? Let's switch that over to the Imperial Japanese, because they were even worse. They were terrible, terrible, terrible. You know, why do they always get a pass in the movies? Poor Germans, they're like history's #1 movie enemy. Well, I guess it's partially because they had such snazzy uniforms. But I watched or saw a YouTube video about that question of the uniforms. And what the guy was saying is the only uniforms that really stand out as particularly snazzy are the SS uniforms. I don't know about that. I mean, I think the whole red background, black swastika thing around the arms, the tall boots and stuff that don't necessarily go just with the SS. You see their ceremonies and stuff. The uniforms all seem to be complementary of each other in this kind of grand staging way. So that's partially why I guess they get picked as movie trope villains. But I'm glad I don't live in Shanghai anymore. By the end of my time in Shanghai, I was very anxious to get out of there. Yeah, well, the Japanese certainly did see the West as invasive, like an invasive species, and did it was broadly very successful at controlling uh, and limiting cultural interaction between the West and the Japanese people. Much more successful than any other culture has been at isolating, at controlling isolation so successfully, you know? What's interesting is that the Japanese, in their post World War II reality, they've basically excised 1930 through 1950 from their from their history books. Talk about the present instead of the past. Okay. Currently, I'm watching several Japanese shows, and here's something weird. Even when I'm watching an anime or any kind of cartoon on like Netflix or something, on Netflix anyway, that's in English, I'll switch it to Japanese audio with American subtitles because I just cannot stand watching cartoons in English anymore. Isn't that funny? I was watching this thing called like Dragon's Fang or something like that on Netflix, and I just couldn't watch it in English. It was just too dorky. But I was able to get through a couple of episodes of it with Japanese voice actors and American subtitles. Because anime just is supposed to sound Japanese. Wakata? So, the other thing I say about Japanese language is it's a small language. It doesn't. The translation of what they're saying, like the word hentai in Japanese, is used to mean pervert, perverted, perversion. It's used to describe what we think of as hentai, which is porny cartoons, but also your friend or their. It's like there's not a lot of like suffixes and shit that you add to it to make it mean different things. So we might say, um, he's a pervert. He's looking at perverted stuff, or that stuff's very pervy, or it indicates a perversion, or we've got all these different variations of words. Um, I don't think that Japanese has all that many variations of words like that, like noun form, adjective form, adverb form. I don't think they have that because just watching a lot of anime, my ears have become very comfortable with the sounds of Japanese, uh, and well, I think there's a lot of communication done tonally, perhaps, that I may not even be picking up on at all, but like the speed or slowness of the delivery, the little slight tonal variations may be highly communicative. I think it's interesting that they always call each other Mr. Whatever, you know, like Tadashi Zenhua-san is what I'd have to call Tadashi Zenhua if I were being polite and we sort of encounter, you know, like we were hanging out together in a group, we'd all talk to each other by calling us Mr. and Miss. Like you'd be Mishap. Well, you're already Mishap, right? But it would be rude of us to call you Hap. Jeremiah Fakes, we'd have to call you Mr. Fakes. And Lou Faye, we'd have to call you Miss Faye. Winston's mom, we'd have to call you Mrs. Mom. You'd have to call me Mr. Strauss. Wouldn't that be weird? If we all went around calling each other Mr. or Mrs. whatever. Mr. R for Ruben. Mrs. MacDaddy. Right. Mrs. Daddy, we'd call you. Mrs. Daddy. Or Ms. Daddy. You're not actually married to Daddy, so. But I like to say, hey, I'm a Sama or a Kaga, okay? Sama is for, like, respected person. Kaga is for, like, king, okay? Well, they're very Japanese. The Japanese culture is highly preservation minded. There's a very broadly held value of viewing the current generation of Japanese people as a continuation of Japan over the course of many centuries. There's a lot of identity shit that goes with being Japanese that doesn't necessarily go with being anything else. It's both good and bad. You know, they refer to it themselves as a strictly hierarchical society. Everybody's supposed to act out the role of their position respective to others, whether it be senpai, sensei. Young people are supposed to be very polite to older people, stuff like that. It's a good place to be old, I guess. If you do a lot of D, make sure you also accompany it with K2. I don't know what that means, Mr. Dentici. Mr. Dentici. Mr. Paeva, thank you for saying I'm your sensei. Sensei is a word they use for teacher, but also for like doctors and stuff. By and large, I reject that whole approach towards the life as not the right paradigm. That you've got to empower individuals to freely choose their destiny, and that and you've got to be meritocratous. A kahuna. I could be a jefe if you'd like. That's Mexican for boss. Jefe. Who you think you are, jefe? I think I'm the boss. You ain't no Bruce Springsteen. No, not that the boss. Not that the boss. A different the boss. You know, the one song I kind of want, a song I kind of want to listen to right now because of these rapidly changing realities of circumstance around me, because of the sudden huge change in everything that happens with my dad's death. I just want to listen to Somebody Stop This Train by, I'm not sure who's it by, but that song, since the first time Abraham played it for me, that song has stuck as, in my mind, one of the most powerful songs ever written. It speaks so much to you if you're anything over early 20s, basically. It may not speak to you much if you're in your early 20s, but it's a song about mortality and about the inevitable hurtling forward of life. The sort of it's a more haunting expression of the generational kind of messages of the show Only Murders in the Building, which is so great. I got to the current episode. It's still coming out. It's in the second season, and we have to wait till Tuesday for the next episode to come out. It's okay, Peter. It's part of life, you know. I'm 51 years old, and when you're in your 50s and your parents die, then things have gone really well for you. You know, my parents celebrated their 59th wedding anniversary earlier this month. 59 years of being married. When shit goes down like it's gone down for me and my family, that's when shit goes absolutely right. Every other alternative is worse. So there's not a good reason for anybody to feel like this is any kind of especially tragic moment, right? It's sad and it's heavy, but it's not something that I haven't already processed in my head emotionally before he even passed, right? I've been thinking about this eventuality for a while now, for the duration of time that I've been here, really. I've been thinking about what it's going to feel like, what it's going to mean, things like that. So, well, now it's time to move forward and begin my real, what will ultimately prove to be the most important time of my life, which is, 51. If I live as long as my father, I have 33 more years, but I expect to live longer than that. I expect to have 33 more good, solid years of productivity, and then maybe decline as I hit my late 80s or 90s. Because I'm the opposite of my father. When you're SI tool, NI polar, you really resonate with statement my dad told me not that long ago, which is, nobody's had any good ideas after 30 years old. I don't resonate with that at all. I don't think I had very many good ideas until I was at least 30 years old, and not really until I was 40. And not really until, the last couple of years, things have started to make sense to me more. I understand better than I ever have before. Maybe not quite well enough yet to have a lot of clarity about exactly a path forward, but the thing is, a path forward begins when waiting for a time to walk ends. It's like there's no path forward, backwards, or any direction when you're waiting to begin walking, as I have been the last few years. So I feel very grateful that Rachel and I found each other, and that we Trouble broke my bong, so I need to get another bong. This is Rachel's bong. It's got its own TE, You gotta hit this bong certain ways. Trouble broke my bong and the Wi-Fi. Well, I think the more SI you are up top, the more it feels as though you're no longer looking for new things. If you're fundamentally reliant on your accumulated experiences to both define you and provide resources for you, then decreasingly do you look forward for other possibilities, right? Because the things you're looking through become more and more numerable. But I feel as though, as I get older, I'm able to narrow my expressive efforts a little bit more than I used to be able to. It doesn't necessarily mean I don't know, we'll have to see. Like I said, the Eric that's been these last couple of years has been manifest in this context, in this frame of reference, and limited accordingly, and not particularly aware. I didn't really realize or think much about the ways in which, the extent to which, that situation persisting was burdening both me and Rachel. To the extent that I did think about that, I'd push it out of the way with admonitions to myself regarding having my priorities straight and caring about my parents, and or admonitions about we need to just be grateful that we're being taken care of, and etc. So there's Well, I mean, I think if in the third slot, you're still dealing with intuitives. It takes an intuitive a long time to gather together. If they're an intuitive with SI in the front stack, to gather together and have set up their SI half of shit. Um, you know, as an NE Dom, my experience has been I spent my life going down all the different wrong paths to figure out where all the boundaries were. Not terribly wrong paths, not necessarily in terms of action, but ideationally wrong. It was not the case that I figured out cognitive functions correctly right away. I had multiple failed attempts to come up with some better explanation than the existing ones. And ultimately the explanation that I came up with was more or less attained by trying to figure out why I kept having to carve away bullshit. And like, is there actually anything but bullshit here, or is it just like an onion, you keep peeling it off and then there's nothing left? But the reason is because I had to get that to meaningfully explain this thing. You've got to account for the following kinds of observationally so things. It was also a recognition that we've already simulated physical world spaces for communicative purposes. Like, that's what we're doing right now, right? This is we're all together in some sense, but there's not really any physical space. This is just, we use that language. This might be called this a room or something. We don't in this instance. We call it a live stream, but the chat is a place where you all are. And in front of his green screen is a place where I am, but really it's to the right of you on the screen is where I am, The point is, in simulating a physical library and attaining genuine information fluidity between individuals and also between groups and individuals, by making access to public's ear more meritocratic by eliminating a lot of barriers in the status quo, which is what the internet did, right? We got to see not a model of attention, but we got to see instead that in order to enable people to pay attention in certain communicative ways requires the following kinds of functionalities. You have to be able to put information, get information, receive information unbidden. The interfacing part has to be provided by the individual people and or by like a game or something that you're playing, right? It's I guess the interface part is the responsiveness in real time to stuff like this. You know, like, okay, I want to move this box around here. You can see me moving it in real time. It's not like I click it. You can imagine an alternative approach where I click it and then I click where I want it to go and it just appears there, right? In which case, it would not show the dynamics of me moving it around. The capacity to do that and display that that's going on, this, you would call this physically interfacing with the system. You can see the real-time interfacing of the system, right? But interface between people, FE interface, requires actual multiple parties here, like Ruben and Winston and Carlos and Jeremiah and Lou. Nevertheless, it's mostly me talking and you guys listening. Ruben says, I love games with deep long-term systems and also elements of real-time reactiveness. Yeah. I mean, if you think about life, it's structured to be an ideal game. It's it begins with usually inversely proportional arrangements of support and freedom, which is to say, everybody has theoretically the capacity to do whatever they want whenever they want, even if it's horribly ill-advised or whatever. In practice, most of us are wholly constrained by the expectations we have of others and we expect them to have of us, and a bunch of other stuff that makes us unwilling to behave in certain ways consistently. And persistently, such that we are highly unlikely to behave in those ways in any kind of real-time circumstance that might require it, you know. So understanding that there was putting information, getting information, receiving information, all of which could be seen as static things, binary things, states of not having written information, then a process of writing information, and then a status of written information, information having been written, that there was another kind of engagement with data that required a more responsive, dynamic approach than just, say, updating SQL tables, right? So, when you start to try to imagine if we were going to model cognitive functions accordingly in terms of what's being done with data where, because with computers you've got your local device, you've got your remote device, and you've got your own person. Well, sure. Like, look, for instance, I conceptualized this turn-based card strategy game based on competition debate that I call Milk Lab. I conceptualized it as something that would be done just with like SQL tables. So basically, you've got a setup, an interface with various frames defined to display various pieces of information that is retrieved from SQL tables. And then you have a table that's sort of a temporary table set up to convey information about the ongoing contest. It's a kind of storing of data. It's basically just tables that you can store data on and access it from via the web. So it's where data. It's one way of storing data on the back end of a computer page, like a website. So if you want to make a primitive kind of web app, you could, in theory, if it's entirely turn-based, like the card game I conceived of, and actually laid out a lot of stuff for. The concept's fairly fleshed out, and it's like, I'm not a computer programmer, but I have examples of what the tables would look like and stuff. It's pretty laid out. It's a pretty good, fully realized thing, I mean, fully realized idea. But I hit the spot where if I'm gonna make it happen, I need to hire people and shit like that. And I'm not that invested in the idea. Even though I think it's a great idea and would be successful. Anyway, it utilizes the fact that in competition debate, people use cards as pieces of evidence. So, in other words, debate's already formatted with cards. They're called cards. They're not actually on cards anymore like they used to be back in the olden days when you did all this work without any internet like I debated. There was no internet when I debated. So you cut out things from magazines and put them on cards and then wrote the tag on top, right? That's why they're called cards still. Anyway, nowadays, obviously they're on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper if they're printed out at all. A lot of people go paperless, and that's normal. People flash drive over their case, certain parts of it, so that to everybody in the round, at certain levels of debate anyway, certain kinds of debate. Like LD and policy do this consistently. PF does it sometimes. But that's not how it was back in the day. So anyway, the point is, a debate card, if you understand competition debate well enough, like I do, then you can articulate all the possible ways that a card might be used into a certain not that huge number of sets of kinds of things, there are certain elements that trigger mechanically with other elements based on, so in other words, if I run a neg critique on the AF because of some non-topical violation, there needs to be an alt. If then in response to that neg K, the AF establishes in an argument that they meet the alt, then the K no longer has any impact. If the K wins, it's a round deciding issue. It's a what we call a voter. So the K then is an all or nothing kind of argument, and if the AF meets the alt or otherwise negates the K, there's a shell of things that have to be established in any critique. It's got to have the violation, the standard, and the alt. If if the app is going to defeat the K, it needs to attack one of those three elements as being inadequate to building the K successfully. So these kind of things are throughout debate, right? It makes it particularly turn into a turn-based card game. And because, like in LD, the topic changes every 2 months, but in policy debate, it only changes once a year. Regardless, the news continues happening, and people are always making new cards. Some cards are extremely warrant specific, which means like I hear that Julie's reading a card from last June about this operation in Pakistan, but I've got a thumper, which is to say a card of more recent evidence that the current events have rendered that previous event either moot or proved it wrong or something like that. So the thing is, since you say that right there, Carlos Paeva, in the ideal incarnation of this milk lab, it functions as a case tester for people who are actually going to run real rounds of LD on the topic. They can try putting together this arrangement of cards, because the thing is, you're limited based on the amount of time you have in competition flow debate. So if I read really fast, I can get more arguments on the flow than if I read really slowly, right? But no matter how fast I read, I can only fit so many arguments into depends on the format of debate, 8-minute speech, 7-minute speech, or 4-minute speech, depending on if you're talking about policy, LD, or public forum. That's the opening speech of the AF, the length of them in each of those events. So, in the card game version, there's no worrying about speed of talking, so we'll just establish a certain number of things that a person can do per turn, and there's a set number of kinds of things that, like establishing is basically reading a card. That is either in your AF, like establishing on the board, on the flow, this argument block, or some part of an argument block. And then there's, or we're establishing a rebuttal, like, okay, this answers that. But then there's additionally mantles, which are statuses that either are binary or sliding scale that are set and adjusted by certain actions. So it's like, if I make this argument, it may turn that other argument. But just because it does it, if I don't make the argument additionally that it turns it, and that therefore, then that status isn't going to change. So taking an action of changing the status that's allowed by a given thing is required. It can't happen automatically, because there are times when you don't want to change the status even though you could. And you want to make the other person recognize that they want to change that status, So anyway, I've got this idea that's a good idea, and I have the knowledge base to actually know how to make this thing in terms of a card game. But it only works as a computer program. There's no way to play this as a card game without, I mean, you can act it out in person, I guess. It's basically like you get several things established here, but they what it really needs though for it to be, and then people do what they do and it rebuts or not. But you can't. It's really difficult to keep track of all that shit without doing a lot of work, like you're in a debate round, right? So you don't want if it's going to be fun for people or good for people, it needs to do all that hard work stuff automatically. Put out what all the key warrants are, flow for you. It needs to flow for you, basically. But that's not a problem. That's easy for this. That's easy to do. To just have tables that have information on them and then present them in a way that it's user friendly rather than strings of numbers and letters, right? But even though it's conceptually straightforward, I don't know if it's easy to actually make it. It begins with what's called a parametric search, which is if you go to muthead.com, muthead.com, it's for Madden Ultimate Team cards, and what their search thing does is it lets you define all these pre-established parameters, like has a speed of over meh, has a whatever over meh, has a whatever over meh, right? So the library of cards that are available to play in this game will be continually growing. Ideally, there'd be an interface where people can cut their own cards and incorporate them into the thing, even potentially once vetted as card makers, and if assuming they meet all these criteria, potentially have their cards available for sale. There should be a steady flow of both free cards to add to people's decks if they want to, and also have available pay cards. So, presumably you have your own library of cards that you own that could be treated as even as NTFs. And then you could some of them could anyway. I mean, they could all be treated as such, but whether or not there's any benefit to treating cards that you want to be common and free as NTFs is another question. And they would actually be fungible, in the sense that if there's multiple instances, it'd be like lithographs. If you've got 100 instances of a lithograph that does exactly the same thing in the Mia, then so anyway, as fully realized, if it could be fully realized as I conceive of it, it would basically, as you're playing the game, you'd have your own existing library of cards to draw from, and you'd have an interface that's like a search interface, but also suggested cards to play in response to whatever, and that allows you to narrow down very easily which things you're looking for in a card. And then if you don't have it in your existing library, there would be some suggested free cards that they can add to their library, and or cards that they can buy that are specially targeted for that at a low cost, like 10 cents or something like that. If it's a common card, right? But the thing is, I don't want to artificially limit access to the ability to do something argumentationally. So I neither want to limit the ability of individuals making cards to treat them as whatever kind of cards they want. But I also don't want to limit individuals' ability to basically recut the same or similar cards, because that's just not how debate goes, you know? So it's like, you can accommodate both, actually, and empower both sides to do what they want. The free market will take care of it. Like, the people making cards will realize there's not really any benefit to being the super rare card unless you really are super badass, in which case you're going to get copied right away and you can't complain about it, right? The purpose of the reason people buy your card ultimately is because it works, it's convenient, it's cheap, and you've got a good reputation as a card cutter, you know? I mean, the thing is, as I'm conceiving of it, first and foremost, it's a debate case tester. So it's like, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, I put together this app for the current LD topic, and then you can play against the computer. As you're playing, you might realize you don't really have a good response to Mia, and then it'll offer to sell you that card, or offer you a free one if there's a free one available, you know? What am I smoking? Marijuana and cigarettes? What are you smoking? Crack and heroin? Hi, Moxie, you shouldn't smoke crack and heroin this early in the morning. It's more of an afternoon thing. Well, as I originally conceived of it, it was foremost as a debate case tester / a game that debaters might play against each other, because it's not intended to. It's intended to include some debate. It's going to have some debate jargon and stuff. It's intended to be for debaters. So it's going to be a steep learning curve for people who aren't debaters, potentially. Well, that's the thing, Carlos. There's an ever-growing library in debate of what are called generics. So you can always attack a frame level thing if you don't have something on the specific warrant of a card. If I don't have a card that says your evidence here on blowback in the Middle East due to U.S. intervention highlights blowback caused by U.S. intervention's impacts on local goat milk production. So I don't have any response to that specifically, right? But instead, I've got a card on interpreting fluid realities as blowback is bad. Now, the thing is, I've got to be careful anytime I go frame level like that, because it might actually impact something in my own, somewhere else in some argument that I've made, right? Over here, I've argued that we should interpret these harms that I'm attributing to the AF through a frame of blowback, and now I've invalidated my own argument there as well as his by choosing to go frame level generic. Well, making a case means you're AF. So you have the first speech and you define what it is that's being talked about. In policy debate, the affirmative is afforded a case area at the end of the year, like in May. They define the next year's topic, right? Then people go to debate camp all summer and build cases and do camp work, basically. Build AFs, prep out general neg blocks and stuff like that. Currently, the topic for this year's debate topic is, it's always phrased like this: the U.S. federal government should substantially increase collaboration with NATO allies in one of the following three areas: AI, biotech, or something else. I don't remember. Oh, maybe trademark? I'm not sure. Anyway, and then the debaters make affirmative cases like the U.S. should substantially, cyber warfare is the third one. So the U.S. should substantially increase their sharing of information with NATO allies regarding cyber threats. And here's how it specifically would look. In the status quo, the NSA's default policy is MIA, and in the AF world, which is to say after we affirm my plan, then the status quo policy of the NSA would be changed by Congress, presumably, to MIA. And then the NEG has prepped out already blocks of stuff that says, basically, sharing information about cyber threats is bad because loose lips sink ships or whatever, you know? Do the NTs outnumber the rest of the types in the debate realm during your era of teaching it? Only if you're looking at the winners. This looks like it would work as general frame level stuff applied to a specific topic with evidence cards that everyone can check. People can create maps and topics with evidence cards. Well, there will, depending on how you want to. I was planning to make it for Lincoln Douglas debate specifically, although probably public forum would be easier because you could. Well, I don't know. I think I was envisioning it just for LD first. LD, the topic changes every 2 months, and it's always a resolution. So essentially, LD defaults to a single paradigm, or should default to a single paradigm of judging, although it doesn't. Like any round, the judge may end up voting on utilitarianism, and both debaters may end up arguing utilitarianism as their framework and not even be in disagreement about it. It happens quite a bit. But that's just, it still ultimately falls beneath the category of truth testing paradigm because you're given a resolution that has a should statement. It's basically a normative statement of some sort, and the affirmation's claim essentially is you should agree with that, or we should all agree with this. It's not that anything specifically should be done necessarily, although they're trying to include more policy elements into LD topics these days. So for example, there was a topic one time a long time ago that was, but I remember it because I think it was the first time I coached LD. Maybe that's why I remember it. But it was, repeated victims of domestic violence have the right to use deadly force against their victimizers. And so that's a good example of an LD topic. It doesn't really say we should do anything, although what's implied is we shouldn't prosecute those people. But you end up getting arguments about rights and responsibilities. So does this victim have any responsibility to get away from their abuser? Oh, of their abusers. That was the last word, not victimizers, abusers. And then what ends up happening is the AF ends up reading cards about how that are narratives of Jody Phillips was in a battered women's shelter when she was dragged forcibly by her husband back to the home and endured 3 more years of continual abuse before meow, 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 meow. People read that kind of card, right? And then you go, okay, well, the thing is, she already had the right to use deadly force in defense of her own life at any point she felt like her life was genuinely in danger, or less than deadly force even, to defend herself. The problem implied by that topic is the problem with that topic, affirming that, is that it suggests that some premeditated execution of their abuser is acceptable. That there's no need to, even though their abuser is presumably giving them plenty of opportunities to use self-defense, that they don't need to either leave or defend themselves. I kind of want to be pushed on my NE or tested. Is there a website that's NE challenging? I mean, it's hard to be NE challenging because extroverted intuition is a creative function. You can be artificially creative in environments like SimCity. I was into it when I was in my early 20s. I was into SimCity 2000 a lot. I used to play a lot of video games. But genuine creativity is creative. It's not active in somebody else's created garden of pretend creativity, you know? It's this rather than something else. Like this is as, if you want your NE to be pushed, well, it's an action function. So you kind of gotta push it yourself or something. I don't know. That's one of the most important things if we're going to talk about typological stuff well, that we need to start getting in the habit of doing is remembering that action functions are action functions, knowledge functions are knowledge functions, etc. So we might say that a given work has good NE. What we really mean is that we intuitively recognize, notice the originality of something to good effect within within our interpretation of the whole. Yeah, improv tests extroverted intuition. If you ask somebody to improvise like jokes or a scene, or to just back and forth riff off of each other or something like that, you're asking them to extrovertedly intuit in a very authentic way, because there's no way to really utilize the introverted sensing half of the extroverted intuition equation to replace extroverted intuition. The alternative to coming up with random stuff on the fly is to memorize something, right? the thing to remember is that extroverted intuition and introverted sensing go together for a reason. So you can think of a spectrum in which I've got a speech to give. On the one end of the spectrum, I write down nothing. I just get up there and start talking. On the other end of the spectrum, I write down everything and I memorize it word for word. Almost always, you're gonna end up somewhere between there, right? Maybe bullet points rather than the whole thing written out word for word, or maybe you've written it out but you haven't memorized it. You're just gonna read it, or there's a lot of things in between the two. Some people don't like to be limited by what they've prepared very much. They feel as though they can do a better job in real time, perhaps because they're garnering real-time cues from, if you're in front of a live audience, for example, and need to read the room as they're talking or something like that. Or perhaps because they expect the exchange to provide them the information they're going to need to know what to do from there, right? If there's an exchange. In the speech example, there's no interchange between people, right? But the thing is, it's always the case that if you have some flexibility with your SI, you can find something in your previous experience to articulate details of in lieu of anything relevant. So if I just wanted to start talking right now, I could say, well, I got up this morning about 5:30 because I had to pee, and I was going to get back into bed, but then I thought I better put the cat outside. She's been inside all night. She probably has to go to the bathroom. And so then I put her on the table outside, and then I thought, well, I better go. If I'm going to go outside at all, I better go let Trouble have some food and let him in so that he doesn't start getting meowy. And then at that point, I got the IMs from inside. So what I'm doing here is just showing that at any point, if I have to talk, and I'm aware of this simple reality that I can do this, I can always say what I did earlier before I started this on that kind of level of detail, and not run out of things to say. So the thing is, if you're talking about improvising, if somebody is aware of that simple trick, then, and they're not given any constraints on how or what they're improvising, then they could just do that and claim, look, I'm improvising beautifully. But they aren't really improvising, they just recalling a set of details from before. So NE then links to divergence. It's unlike SI, which is a simple conversion of your experience into simple descriptors of your experience. Extroverted intuition wants to deal in the currency of intuition, not in the currency of sensation. So even though my knowledge function has available to it a bunch of stuff that's in sensation dollars, I don't talk about those. What I'm doing, I've already converted them into intuition dollars, and then those concrete sensory dollars come out purely as examples of, or ways to make the idea more communicably accessible to people who are more SI types. If you're NI tool, you're not going to very often say to me, can you give me an example as a way of helping yourself understand what I'm getting at. You might just say, I'm not sure what you're getting at here. And then I'll probably give you an example unbidden. But the more SI you are, the more you want examples. Although it's also the case that SI6 often asks for examples. Not often, but asks for examples more than you'd expect from an NI front stack person. That's that 6-slot thing for you. You know, it's like it's extra conscious for a backstack function. Or extra visible to others, I guess you might say. It's more like extra visible to others. But I guess it's conscious too, in a way. What about SI polar? Well, they don't ask for many examples. You know, they understand it conceptually as you're trying to position it conceptually initially. What I talk backwards of how I understand. I begin with experiences and then extrapolate out to see if they test out to be representative of some frame level truth, right? And some of them do and some of them don't. The ones that do, I then talk about them as that frame level truth first and then present the concrete example. But depending on how straightforward the concept is, it may or may not require an example. You know how sometimes you leave the store and you realize as you're driving home, I forgot this one thing. I could give you an example of that, but it wouldn't help at all. Conceptually, the concept is already so particularized that an example provides no further way for you to get what I'm saying. If you don't get what I'm saying there, then I don't know what to tell you. But most people can say, yeah, that's happened to me before. Or actually, that's never happened to me before. But regardless, they're going to know what I mean. There's not going to be any complications there. If I say, can you give me an instance when your epistemological reliance on your experience displaced your instincts such that you failed to notice something you should have? Most people will say, okay, can you give me an example? Because I'm not quite sure what you're getting at here. Once the example is provided, presumably then they're able to fit the pieces of the NI expression of it onto the specifics, right? So when I tell the potato touch story, for me, it's an example of being SI and my not having conscious or valued SE and my not having conscious NI meant that I failed to recognize that this currently unfolding event had rendered moot all this preparation I had done for the moment, right? And it's a form of target blindness where your attention, because it's on one thing, you miss something else that you would normally see if you weren't paying such intense attention to this. The sensing types are not in such close communication with their unconscious. They do not trust an answer that suddenly appears. They do not think it prudent to pounce. They tend to define intelligence as soundness of understanding, a sure and solid agreement with conclusions with facts, and how is that possible until the facts have been considered? Seems to me that Isabel Briggs there is conflating two different things. Like in the latter part of that statement, she's talking about a deliberation approach. In the former part of that statement, she's yeah, I think that's a mess. I don't think that I don't think that makes any. That's not appropriately assigned to sensing types. If you began that by saying the deliberation types, FI and TI DOMs, and you got rid of that first part, are not in such close communication with their unconscious, and you just started with the deliberation DOMs do not trust an answer that suddenly appears. They do not think it prudent to pounce. They tend to define intelligence. I don't know about that part, but how is it possible until the facts have been considered? That is probably the frame of reference of a deliberation type. Some of that stuff is, but that's a mishmash of garbage, basically. It's very misleading, confusing, and just flat out wrong in multiple places. So, Isabella Briggs, you can shove that back into whatever orifice you pulled it from, please. I'm getting a cup of coffee in case you guys are wondering. My boyfriend's back and I'm gonna have some cheese now. Hey now, my boyfriend's back. I'm not sure if you guys heard the news, but my boyfriend's back. Meow, 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 meow. Hey now, my boyfriend's back. Oh, amazing peace, how sweet the flow that streams forth from my cock. I once had peace inside of me, and now at last I do not have pee inside of me. I mean, to be more complete in expressing the concept. The thing is, of course, it was a lie, because I'm not done peeing. So that song was a lie. Please don't believe it. I do still have pee in me. Maybe that's why it didn't come out right syllabically. Because deep down inside of me, I knew it was going to be a lie. And lies shouldn't be expressed in grammatically correct ways. Or I guess you'd say, syntactically complete. Yeah. That's what you'd say. If you were into saying things like that. I love saying things. Me too. What say we say some things? I'll say. What will you say? What I say? What? I say. You do say. Are you the say hey kid? Oh meow. Would you like some more water? I'll get you some. Here you go, Mr. Man. Well, I'm done peeing and making coffee. You know, what I've always said, we'll have fun till the daddy takes the T-bird away. I don't actually have a T-bird. Never did. I guess I'm probably going to wrap this up here pretty quick because I got a lot of stuff to do today. Got some difficult tasks to do. And I need to get some things done. I need to check my email, go through some shit. I'm supposed to go to this YouTube party tomorrow night. And I think I might play a song before I go. My finger feels more or less better. I definitely cracked this bone again in some sense. It's like this. I broke this finger before, and I don't know if I re-broke it or what, but I didn't completely not re-break it. Let's put it that way. God give me strength, so says Reuben, and I don't disagree. I think it's a grooving idea for me. God, I'd like for you to give me strength. You give me plenty. Don't mind if you complain, I understand it. If you wanna make it rain and gray days coming for me, after all that would be just evening the ledger overall. I love you and I'm sorry. Please forgive me and thank you a lot. I don't recall whether I called Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. You know what was funny? This made me laugh. Michelle Way leaving a comment telling me my dad wasn't going to heaven. Well, my dad certainly would have agreed with her. He's quite the staunch atheist. It says in his last will or whatever that he doesn't want any religious ceremony at his funeral. You keep God out of my goddamn funeral. Okay, Dad. I know. Yes, yes. Those horrible make-believe deities. I got you. I know. There'll be no mention of God, okay? Welcome everybody to this wonderful God-free funeral. There'll be no mention of God, please hear. I printed out a copy of his express wishes regarding this matter. There'll be no God at this funeral, alright? So just, there's gonna be no crosses on their tombstones either. My dad made that very clear. So, that's his final fuck you to Christians. He really doesn't like Christians. He's not a Christian. He's not a fan of Christianity. Not that he's a fan of some other religion. But yeah, he really didn't like Christians. He just thought religion in general was bad. Anyway, bye everybody. Thanks for being here. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.